So the main purpose of using a static data member inside a class is to store some kind of information which is shared among all the objects of that class. So now we are going to write a program to demonstrate the such kind of a use of static data members. Okay, so for that let us create a class counter, int id and static int count. These are the two data members of this class. Id is an instance variable and count is a static data member, that is it is a class variable. Okay, and both of them are private members of this class. And in the public section, let us have the constructor first, counter, count plus plus, and id is equal to let us reverse the order of these statements. id equal to count and then count plus plus. So what are we doing in this constructor? Whenever an object will be created, an id will be assigned to that object. So initially the value of count is 0 because the static data members are automatically initialized to 0. Okay, so the first object will have id 0 and count plus plus, it will make the count equal to 1. So count has two purpose here. First is it is counting the number of objects created so far. So count plus plus, when count becomes 1, it means one object has been created. And the second purpose is to generate an id. Initially count is 0, so id 0 is assigned to first object. Then count becomes 1, id 1 will be assigned to the second object, and so on. Okay. Let us also create a destructor, counter, let us print some message here, destructing object id. Okay, so it will print the id of the object which is being destroyed. And because we are destroying an object, so count must be decremented. Okay, let us have a function word show id which can tell us the id of the current object. Cout id is equal to id. Okay, and also have a function show count. It will tell us the number of objects created so far. Cout total number of objects. It is stored in variable count. Okay, and let us end this class and also define the variable count. Okay, and now we will define the main function. In the main function, let us create an object of class counter C1. Okay, so what will happen? The constructor will be called which will initialize id equal to count. So id of C1 will be 0 and count plus plus count will become 1 because we have created one object. Okay. And let us call C1 dot show id. It will tell us the id of the object C1, and let us also call show count. C1 dot show count. Okay. And return 0. Now let us run it. id is 0 and the total number of objects is 1, and when the program ends it will destruct that object 0. Okay, so far so good. Let us create another object, counter C2. Okay, C2. Let's run it. Now id to the second object is 1. Okay, so the same static variable id is being used here, so it is not being created for each of the objects. It is shared by both the objects C1 and C2. First, when we create object C1, count is incremented from 0, it becomes 1, and second, when we create object C2, the count is incremented again, it becomes 2. Okay, so when the second object is created, total number of objects becomes 2, and then as we know that the objects are destroyed in the reverse order in which they are created. So first object 1 will be destroyed and then object 0 will be destroyed. Okay, let us modify this program a bit more and add a function void f and void f here. Inside this function, what I will do is I will create another object, counter C3. Okay, and C3 dot show id and C3 dot show count. Okay, and let us call function f here, and after the call I want to see the count, how many objects are there. Okay, but it seems that I cannot use the show count function, or can I use it? I can use it. I can write C1 dot show count. So it will tell me the number of objects so far. Okay, because show count is using this static variable count. Okay, so through C1 object or through C2 object I can access this show count function. Okay, now let us try to run this. Okay, when C1 is created, id is 0. When C2 is created, id becomes 1. Then we make a call to the function. Inside that function, C3 is created. So id of C3 is 2 and the total number of objects is 3. Okay, then we get out of this function. When this function is exited, the object C3 will be destroyed. What is the id of C3? id of C3 is 2. That is why it is printing destructing object 2. Okay, and we return to the main function, and inside the main function, after call to f, we again call C1 dot show count. Okay, you can also write C2 dot show count. The answer will be same. Okay, the output will be same, right? So C1 dot show count, now it is telling us the total number of objects are 2 now, because the object C3 which was created inside the function is destroyed now, because we have returned from the function. That function has terminated. That is why we are having only 2 objects, and then main function will end, and object 1 and object 0, they will also be destroyed. Okay.